The real reason I left Sanford and Son, well, I've never said this before, and I know it's going to cause a lot of trouble, but the real reason I left Sanford and Son because those lousy bastards over there, they took and gave me no kind of money, no money at all.
They cut his salary down $5,000. He was making $10K in Vegas. And they called him down to the IRS offices, and he performed, and not in a nice, kind way. And then the trucks pulled up, and they took everything.
Redd Foxx was the comedy legend who made America laugh with Sanford and Son and bold, uncensored albums. But what most people never realized was just how tragic his life truly was.
Hey, wait a minute, Fred, you can't put us out. We're your relatives.
You're a damn lie. Ain't nobody in my family like neither one of y'all. Now get out.
Behind the fame, he was exploited by record labels, underpaid on television, hounded by lawsuits, and crushed by the IRS.
Every year, Redd would file, but he never, ever paid. And they called him down to the IRS offices.
The world saw a comedy icon, but few knew the man behind the laughs faced financial ruin and personal battles that would follow him to the very end. Before Sanford and Son ever came along, Redd Foxx was already known in comedy circles. His albums sold everywhere, and people loved his raw style that other comics wouldn't dare touch. But while the record companies were getting rich off his jokes, Foxx himself barely saw the money. He had signed contracts that paid him little, while labels like Laugh Records sold huge numbers of his albums. To many fans looking back now, this was pure exploitation. Foxx helped build the comedy album market, yet he didn't own the rights to his own work. Later in life, lawsuits over these recordings meant that he not only lost money, but also lost control of the material that had made him famous. Things didn't change much when he moved into television. In 1972, Redd Foxx became Fred Sanford on Sanford and Son. The show was a monster hit. It was NBC's crown jewel, pulling in millions of viewers and massive advertising dollars. But Foxx himself felt cheated. Compared to white actors starring in other sitcoms at the same time, his salary was far smaller. He felt the pay gap wasn't just unfair, it was a slap in the face.
At one point, he was earning $25,000 per episode, or about $173,000 today, plus a 25% cut of the profits as a producer over all 6 seasons.
Foxx started to push back. On set, he walked out more than once. He refused to tape episodes until NBC gave in to his demands for higher pay. To the audience at home, everything looked fine. Fred Sanford was as funny as ever, but behind the scenes, the tension was boiling. Foxx clashed with producers, showed up late, and let his frustrations spill over into the workplace. Eventually, the situation exploded. Redd Foxx left Sanford and Son entirely, and the network struck back. NBC and the production company filed a $10 million breach of contract lawsuit against him. That single case was enough to put his entire career in danger.
He said, then you don't know. Redd had a front page on Variety that said that this is it. He's not going to do it after this season. He's quitting.
Looking back, it's a bitter irony. The man whose records had filled comedy clubs and whose TV show was one of the most successful of the 1970s felt underpaid, unprotected, and trapped. Every time he stood up for himself, whether it was with record companies or TV executives, he seemed to pay the price. He was the star, yet somehow he always ended up fighting just to get what he deserved. This was the pattern that followed Redd Foxx throughout his career. The comedy albums left him broke. The hit TV show ended with lawsuits. The industry kept profiting, but Foxx himself was stuck in a cycle of frustration and financial trouble that would only grow worse over time. While Redd Foxx's comedy career made him a household name, his personal life often looked like a storm spinning out of control. One of his biggest ventures outside of television was his nightclub, Redd's Place. At first, it sounded like a natural move, a comedy legend running his own spot where people could drink, laugh, and hang out. But Redd's Place quickly gained a reputation for chaos.
Think back, fellas. Remember the first time you checked it out close?
Accounts from the time describe the atmosphere as anything but safe. Fights would break out in the crowd. Sometimes the chaos escalated into full-blown shootouts. Drug use was openly visible. Instead of being a place that built his legacy, Red's place became known for disorder and danger. To some, it was just a wild party environment, but for Foxx, it also dragged his name into controversy. This chaotic streak wasn't just limited to his business. Red Foxx himself had a history with drugs. Friends and colleagues from the comedy world have said he smoked weed regularly and also used cocaine. In the 1970s and 80s, this wasn't unusual in entertainment circles, but it added another layer of risk to his already turbulent lifestyle. Drugs brought moments of escape, but also danger and instability.
So Red and I were just two actors that came together. He never gave me no money. I never gave him any money. Money, women, drugs never came between us.
Then came the trouble at home. Red Fox's first marriage to Betty Jean turned into a storm of its own. Allegations of abuse and infidelity surrounded the relationship. He was said to have stepped out on his marriage multiple times, with a particular interest in Asian women. Whether all the rumors were true or not, what is clear is that the marriage was scarred by conflict and unhappiness.
Right now you are a bachelor?
Semi
Semi-bachelor.
You know what I mean?
Does that mean you're about to get married?
No, it don't mean that.
The hardships in his personal life went even deeper. Before fame, Foxx admitted that he sometimes had to steal food just to get by. Those early years of desperation stayed with him. It showed the lengths he was forced to go to when there was no other choice. For all the glitz of Hollywood later, he never really escaped the struggles of survival that had marked his youth. This mix of nightclub chaos, substance use, messy relationships, and desperate survival all painted a picture of Red Foxx as a man constantly caught in conflict. He could make the world laugh with a single line, but behind the scenes, he was living in a whirlwind that threatened to pull him under. Every part of his personal life seemed to carry a shadow. Long before the comedy albums and television fame, Red Fox's life carried scars that would follow him into adulthood. One of the deepest wounds came from childhood, when his father walked out on the family. That early abandonment shaped him in ways that never fully healed. Growing up without that stability planted feelings of loss and mistrust that colored his relationships later in life.
Because I knew depression when I was a youngster. Oh, yes, 11 kids in my family.
Was there, Red?
11. We lived in a one-room kitchenette.
His early years were also marked by clashes with authority. In 5th grade, Foxx was expelled from school for defiance. To some, it might have looked like a small incident, but for a kid like Foxx, it revealed a streak of resistance against rules and structures he didn't respect. That defiance would later fuel his comedy, but also create constant problems with networks, producers, and anyone trying to control him. As he grew older and his career developed, the larger world made sure to remind him of the barriers he faced. Even as a successful black entertainer, Foxx experienced the sting of racial segregation in Las Vegas. At a time when he was making crowds roar with laughter, he still couldn't enjoy the same freedoms as white performers. Casinos would welcome him on stage, but close their doors when he tried to enter as a guest. The contradiction was glaring. Loved for his talent, but denied basic respect off stage.
I think I told you this last year, you asked me how did I think that I would be able to know what was black better than anyone else, and I told him because I've been black longer than all y'all.
His career also brought its share of broken bonds. Foxx's partnership with fellow comedian Slappy White had once been a cornerstone of his rise. Together, they created moments that shaped early stand-up comedy. But without explanation, the duo split. No detailed reason was ever given, but the abrupt end left a mark. For fans, and for Foxx himself, it was one more relationship cut short. Even his attempts to push forward in the entertainment industry sometimes hit walls. At one point, Frank Sinatra's label considered signing him, but the deal fell apart due to contractual complications. For Foxx, it was another example of the frustrating business side of show business, where opportunity could vanish without warning. Tragedy struck even in the places he built himself. His club, Red's Place, became the site of a destructive fire. Some have linked it to the unsafe atmosphere that defined the venue. The blaze left damage that added to his troubles, another disaster tied to his name. And yet, through all of this, Foxx never stopped pushing back. On Sanford and Son, he openly resisted roles or jokes that leaned too heavily on stereotypes. He didn't want to see black characters reduced to caricatures. That fight earned him respect from some, but created even more conflict with producers and executives who cared more about ratings than representation.
I think I told you this last year, you asked me how did I think that I would be able to know what was black better than anyone else, and I told him because I've been black longer than all y'all.
By the late 1970s, Foxx even tried branching out with his own variety show, the Red Fox Comedy Hour. But it was short-lived, canceled after a few months. For a man already struggling to prove his worth, the failure stung hard. It was another reminder that the industry wasn't built to protect him, even after years of success. From early abandonment to racism, failed partnerships, destructive fires, and failed shows, Foxx's story was filled with blows that cut deep. No matter how far he climbed, there was always something waiting to knock him back down. If one theme defined Red Fox's later years, it was money problems. Despite earning millions across his career, by the 1980s, he was drowning in debt. The biggest enemy was the IRS. For years, Foxx either underpaid or completely skipped taxes, and the government eventually came for him hard. Reports show that he owed millions. When the IRS finally cracked down, they didn't just send letters. They showed up at his Las Vegas home, seizing property and stripping the place bare. Cars, furniture, jewelry, even personal items were carted off to cover his debt.
And they called him down to the IRS offices, and he performed, and not in a nice, kind way. And then the trucks pulled up, and they took everything.
Neighbors watched as the once proud comedian was reduced to little more than the clothes on his back. It wasn't just a financial blow, it was humiliation. The man who had made the country laugh on primetime television was now on the evening news for losing everything to the taxman. Foxx's money issues didn't stop there. Even when he tried to rebuild, the debts followed him. He still owed large sums, and the IRS kept circling. Every paycheck he managed to land, whether through stand-up gigs or television appearances, felt like it was already gone before he touched it.
Every year, Red would file, but he never, ever paid. And they called him down to the IRS offices.
Friends like Pat Morita, best known as Mr. Miyagi from The Karate Kid, spoke about trying to help him. Eddie Murphy famously stepped in at one point, covering bills and giving Foxx chances to work again. But the help wasn't enough to erase years of financial missteps and crushing debt. To make matters worse, Foxx's reputation as a star was no longer what it had been. Producers remembered the walkouts, the lawsuits, and the clashes. While his comedy legacy was undeniable, his professional reputation made networks think twice about giving him another big shot.
I used to hear the stories about Red Fox wants a raincoat with a window in it, whatever the hell he wanted.
Very difficult personality, to say the least. What in the world would make you think you could make a television star out of a Red Fox?
Then there were the legal fights over his old comedy recordings. Foxx had lost the rights to much of his material, meaning that even when his albums continued to sell, he didn't see the money. For a man whose words had built an empire for record labels, that was one of the cruelest blows. He was essentially cut off from the wealth his own talent had created. By the late 1980s, Red Fox was in a cycle he couldn't break. Debt piled up faster than income. The IRS kept coming. Friends tried to step in, but the hole was too deep. The financial ruin was more than numbers on a page. It weighed on his health, his spirit, and his sense of self. For someone who had once stood at the very top of television, it was a tragic fall. As the 1980s turned into the 90s, Redd Foxx was still working, but the conflicts that had haunted his career followed him to the very end. One of the biggest problems came with his final sitcom, The Royal Family. The show was created in 1991 with Eddie Murphy as executive producer. For Fox, this was supposed to be a comeback, a chance to prove he could still carry a primetime show. But almost immediately, the same battles that had dogged him for decades appeared again.
So Eddie just slides down the wall. He's just sitting on the floor laughing. He said, "Let's take a lunch break." And he went in the trailer and he wrote The Royal Family.
Fox clashed with the mostly white production team. Reports suggest there were disagreements over creative direction and personal tensions on set. Some of his frustration came from long-standing issues, like fighting against stereotypes or demanding fair treatment. But by this point in his life, the clashes felt heavier, more personal, and more draining. It wasn't the first time either. Back in the Sanford and Son days, he had walked off set repeatedly, refusing to shoot until his demands were met. The producers sued him for breach of contract then, and the bad blood never really faded. By the time he reached The Royal Family, Fox had a reputation in Hollywood as difficult, which made each new clash even more damaging.
I think television true with me. I've been away from television 2 or 3 years and no one's called me to do anything.
There were also lingering disputes with other stars. His disagreements with Bill Cosby had been well known. At the time, it seemed like just another professional rivalry. In later years, when Cosby's own controversies came out, some looked back and wondered if Fox had seen things others ignored. Still, at the time, those disputes just added to his list of conflicts. Even the victories he did achieve came at a cost. Standing up against producers, fighting stereotypes, and demanding better pay may have been righteous in spirit, but it left him with fewer allies in the industry. The networks didn't see him as a pioneer. They saw him as a problem. By the time The Royal Family aired, Fox's health and finances were already stretched thin. He needed the show to succeed, not just for his legacy, but for survival. But the set was tense, the ratings were shaky, and the stress was visible on his face. Instead of being the triumphant return he deserved, it became one more battleground. For a man who had once carried NBC on his back with Sanford and Son, it was a painful reminder of how far things had fallen. The conflicts, lawsuits, and clashes that had defined his past refused to let him go. In the final stretch of his life, Redd Foxx was still fighting, but it felt like the battles were already lost. By 1991, Redd Foxx had lived through more than most comedians could imagine. Poverty, hustling in nightclubs, racial barriers in Vegas, superstardom on Sanford and Son, bitter disputes, and crushing IRS seizures. Now, in his late 60s, he was still grinding, not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. The debts were heavy, and his health was already fragile. His big return came with a new sitcom, The Royal Family, produced by Eddie Murphy, who looked up to Redd as a comedy pioneer. On paper, it was supposed to be a comeback. Murphy was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, and his backing meant Redd might finally get the respect and financial relief he deserved. CBS pitched the show as a family-centered sitcom that would remind audiences of Sanford and Son without copying it outright.
His life was unjust and saved by his relationship with Eddie Murphy. People hardly put into him what he put into them. In his death, he left a mountain of debt.
But behind the scenes, Redd was under enormous pressure. Every episode meant a paycheck that could chip away at the mountain of debt. The joy of acting wasn't the driving force anymore. Survival was. Friends and colleagues noticed the stress. He was still sharp on stage, still throwing out his trademark one-liners, but his body was wearing down. Years of smoking, late nights, and the emotional strain of financial ruin had taken a toll. Then came October 11th, 1991, the day everything stopped. While rehearsing on the set of The Royal Family in Los Angeles, Red Fox collapsed from a massive heart attack. At first, the cast and crew thought he was joking. After all, Red had spent years pretending to clutch his chest and shout, "I'm coming, Elizabeth," in Sanford and Son. This looked like another gag, but it wasn't.
Oh, this is a big one. Is that Elizabeth? I'm coming to join you, honey.
As seconds turned into minutes, the truth set in. Red wasn't acting. He was dying. Co-stars and staff rushed to help, but the delay was fatal. By the time paramedics arrived, he was gone. Just like that, one of comedy's most groundbreaking voices died on the job, broke and underpaid to the very end.
Well, he was always doing pratfalls. And I thought that's what he did. Everybody thought that's what he did.
The aftermath was as tragic as his final years. His estate was so tangled in debt that there was little left for family or friends. The IRS was still circling, and instead of celebrating his life, much of the conversation turned back to his money problems. Even in death, Red Fox couldn't escape the shadow of financial ruin. Demond Wilson later said it was heartbreaking but inevitable, that Red had ignored warnings, lived too big, and left himself exposed. Others argue the opposite, that Hollywood bled him dry, profited off his talent, then discarded him. Both might be true. What's certain is that Red Fox died without the recognition or financial security he deserved.
That was his fault. He did that to himself.
I guess because you would imagine that, you would assume that the people around him would look after him, or was that not the case?
The people around him were sycophants.
Today, when people revisit his story, they remember the laughter, the sharp tongue, the fearless comedy. But they also see the warning signs. A man who helped change television, but was failed by the system around him. From the IRS stripping his house to the heart attack that was mistaken for a joke, Red Fox's final chapter is one of the most tragic endings in entertainment history. And that's why so many say, we really didn't know how tragic Red Fox's life was.